What's up, everyone? My name is Nightmare, and this is episode 1 of Understanding Deadlock, where I'm going to be trying to take some big MOBA concepts and I'm going to break them down in the scope of Deadlock. And I'll sort of explain kind of the twist that this game puts on these concepts and use in game examples. This is a pro VOD if you like to follow along. I'm going to have this on in the background while I explain some things and also point out to some events in the game. So, episode 1, we're going to be talking about tempo. So, I looked up a definition for tempo in MOBAs, and it's told me that it's using your resources to deny your opponents access to their time. This is very confusing and not very straightforward. So, I'm going to change this definition to basically forcing your opponent to do something. I'm going to divide this video into 3 different sections. It's going to be laning tempo, early tempo, and mid-game tempo, sort of as the game naturally has its own timeline, and I'll explain the differences as I go throughout. So laning tempo is all about establishing a strong foundation in the first few minutes. The 3 key points are denying souls, box smart, and force buys. Now the first one is the most simple one and straightforward that you see in most games. Denying souls. Souls are the main resource that fuel your items and power. There's no XP or gold in this game. It's all just tied to souls. So you just have one big massive resource that you have to juggle. Whenever you see enemy minions or neutral creeps about to die, just focus on last hitting or just shooting them at the right time. Just make sure you have the right timing, secure the souls, and don't get denied. Make sure you deny whenever you can. Another important thing to note is the way the soul splitting works. You want to make sure that you don't get denied because it'll mess up you and your teammate. But if you deny a soul, only you get it, if that makes sense. So the soul deny isn't duplicated, if that makes any sense. I'm going to be doing a bit of a deeper dive into laning and go into the nitty-gritty mechanics that they have, but for now I just thought that was important to explain. Basically, the more that you deny, the bigger swing that you create. There's going to be a swing in souls, and in turn, there's going to be a swing in power. So, second point is to box smart. I mean this in both the literal sense and the figurative sense. Literally, what I mean is boxing is making sure that you are taking the correct jabs. Playing both offense and defense. Making sure that you aren't getting hit more than you should be, and making sure that you're hitting your opponents as much as you can. It's a game of balancing and juggling, as I said, but it's very important that you understand what your role is, especially in the lane. Are you going to be a poker like Grey Talon, or are you someone that's supposed to soak damage or apply pressure like Yamato or Viscous, right? You sort of have to understand your role and play the role to the best that you can. And also kind of not be afraid to do things outside of your role. So what does that mean? That means that this Grey Talon can't be scared. See, if he had missed that arrow, he shouldn't be scared to go and dive this Viscous like he's doing, right? Or the Yamato before. This is a very important part of tempo because you don't want to be so predictable so that your opponent can predict exactly what you're doing just because you're on a specific character, right? So this is one part of boxing smart. This is what I mean literally. Figuratively, what I mean is making sure that you are getting the crates and soul vases that spawns in the jungle at the 3-minute mark. There's usually close boxes that you can grab that you should incorporate in your pathing routine, for lack of better words. Making sure that you can grab them whenever you can and just juggling that resource. And also getting the golden statues that provide those permanent buffs. They add up over time, and it's if you neglect it early, it's really bad. But it's not super important, but it's just one part of tempo. And also, if your opponents are going to steal your boxes, just don't let them, right? It's just one of the objectives that you're fighting for in the early game. This is also part of zoning because you're grabbing resources and you're forcing your opponents to stay back by if you manage to steal your opponent's boxes. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Forcing buys is another part of the laning tempo. There's limited resources in the early game, so there's not really a lot of things you can buy. And if you buy something, you're kind of stuck to it in the early game. Sorry, I'll actually reiterate that you are stuck to it in the early game if you buy something. So your decisions matter way more. So what does this mean? If you're boxing, for example, if you're boxing this Abrams out, for example, he's probably going to buy more green items just naturally because he has to survive now longer in fights, right? Um, Inversely, if you're full HP, you're probably going to be buying more power items or damage items or util, whatever can create opportunities for you to pressure your opponent and fight them more, right? So you want to take this into account and deny your opponent from doing anything. For example, if there's like your opponent wants to save up for like a resto locket or like maybe like Tesla bullets or any of those items that take some time to acquire the souls for, you might want to put some pressure on them, right? Play the tempo game. Don't let them do what they want, right? What they want to do is save up souls. You just don't want to let them do that. We're going to be transitioning now into the early tempo, which is I'm going to define as when camps are spawning. So when these camps have spawned is when like early tempo starts, because you now suddenly have to factor in a lot more of the farm resources. So first point is farm float. You're obviously still going to need to accumulate souls in this phase of the game, but you now have to balance the farming with the map pressure. So you want to keep an eye on wave timings. If you can clearly clear a lane, rotate to a jungle or an objective, then do any of those. You always want to make sure there's no empty lane and that souls are never being wasted. The continuous flow of farm without letting your enemies pick off your towers keeps your tempo rolling. So it's essentially what you want to do is catch waves, get farm, deny enemies from getting your tower. And if you are able to get their tower in the process, great. The biggest thing in the mid game as well is the use of rotations, specifically rotations between lanes, as it's kind of encouraged more so in this time of the game, and people are going to start to use those zipline boosts. They're going to use those air vents, they're going to use those teleporters once they open up, and kind of find these pockets of time where they have good tempo, and so their engagement is now advantageous. So you're going to see, like, around especially at the 8-minute mark, people are going to start to move. They're going to see some ganks happen. You already see the Vindicta now moving over towards the middle lane, over from the left lane, looking for a snipe now that she has her execute. Again, this is just playing into your role. If you know that your character is good at ganking and you generate souls from ganking, you should probably gank. Vindicta is the only character that can really generate souls like that out of nowhere, but keep that in mind for whatever role you have. Just if the Viscus doesn't generate souls, but he has a great ult for ganking, so naturally he's going to gank, right? And now this tempo game has sort of moved from the laning phase, where it's a sort of two-dimensional box. What I mean by that is it's this duo versus this duo, right? So it'd be the Geist and Paradox now boxing the tag team duo of Vindicta and Abrams. So now in the early tempo, in the early part of the game, now you're sort of doing three-dimensional rotations. You're going over to other lanes and even crossing over using the teleporters. So you really want to make sure that you can be a bit confusing for the opponent in terms of rotations and do unexpected things, right? In the early game, people aren't really like that powerful, right? There's no heavy outliers in terms of souls on this team, but you will find pockets of overpowered situations because characters just play to their strengths, right? And they essentially only play in those timings, right? Sorry, I gotta scroll down a little bit. So yeah, teleporters and ziplines are great for quick rotations. They essentially allow you to go from the origin, which is your spawn, to wherever in a very short amount of time. Make sure that you're using the teleporters whenever you can and you have correct pathing. Sometimes people don't understand that you can like use the teleporters, so you go through the jungle. Even if it's the side teleporters, you can combine them. You can combine the teleporters plus zip lines to just have really quick rollouts and get to your destination quicker. Whether your destination is your team, an objective, or a farm, just making sure that whatever you got to do, you do it quick. Is essentially all that you need to know about the early game. And this is also important for air vents. Just understand where they are. Make sure that they're a part of your little rollout routines and how you traverse throughout the map, and you'll just have better tempo naturally. Another part about air vents is also using them for zoning. So for example, like if somebody's running away from you, you know they're probably going to run into a vent, or they're going to try to path towards a vent in the early game, just because they naturally don't have movement resources like Majestic Leap or extra stamina or whatever item it is. They don't really have access to that, so they need to use like the resources they have on the map, which is most naturally the air vents. So if you're chasing someone and you lose track of them or whatever, you can just use your brain a little bit, understand that they're gonna probably path to an air vent, and now you suddenly have better tempo because you're one step ahead of them. And yeah, if your opponents aren't using the teleporters, make sure you're using the teleporters and air vents. Like it's an immense part of rotations that a lot of lower level teams don't really understand. And it's like honestly a cheat code to early game macro, I'd say. We're now about a minute into the mid game. I define the mid game as a 10-minute mark because that's when the urn spawns, like one of the big objectives that generate souls, and also the mid boss and buffs, just other objectives that are power resources and also time resources, because the rejuve gives you like quite literally gives you time. So really important to structure the game now around those two things, or those three things. So the 3 points I kind of want to focus on the most in the mid game is the urn, coordinated rotations, and keeping vision / map control. So like I said, the first one, the urn, is one of the most important objectives in Deadlock, and it's actually very controversial, I'd say. It's very, very important and almost crucial to the point where if you aren't playing urn or tying it into your macro as a team, it's very detrimental. You want to make sure that you're forcing fights in and around the urn, whether it's the pickup or the drop off, and also how you how you manage your team during the urn. So for example, what I mean by this is if you have important ultimates such as Lash ult or Kelvin ult or any sort of abilities or resources that allow you to have an upper hand on the urn, you kind of want to have those players / resources close to those locations. So now this is another thing you have to balance, because you are suddenly relocating away from your assigned lane to wherever your role has to go, right? So I kind of feel that at the 10-minute mark, everyone isn't really like summoned to their locations. You're not really like clocking into work, but at the 10-minute mark, everyone's slowly starting to make their way to their positions and kind of be ready by like the 11 to 12-minute mark to sort of do whatever their role is, right? And you sort of see this across the board. Sapphire's having a little bit of issues getting some towers, so they're gonna still stay in this lane to get the tower. But for the most part, you're going to see Amber sort of balance those points that I've mentioned to keep up good tempo. Next point is coordinated rotations. Like I said, with the urn thing, if you have like useful abilities, you kind of want to be in the right place at the right time. So what that means is making sure that your people with those abilities are at the right place at the right time by communicating. If you have a Lash and a Kelvin on the same team, you kind of want to play together during the mid game, especially when you have your ults, because it's just a guaranteed combo. Making sure that you understand what you can do is very important, and also making sure you can understand what the opponent can do is very important. So, for example, what that means is vice versa. If the other team has a Kelvin Lash and you spot the Kelvin or the Lash, you can safely assume that the Kelvin or that the other one is going to be with them just because it is optimal for them to run together. This is kind of where mind games start to begin and where conditioning is very important, but I won't really go into that too much. Tempo is all about foregoing the it's not foregoing the psychological part of the game, but you're essentially just outpacing your opponent and not playing the psychological as much because you are forcing them to do whatever you want, right? So that's just another important part. Make sure you're doing rotations together. Teams that play together win together. I mean, like it's cliche, but it's just very important to understand, especially in a MOBA. When you are alone, you are way more vulnerable than if you are with two people than you are with three people, and it doesn't really scale linearly. It's like the more people you have, the harder of a force it is to stop, and usually it can only be met with equal numbers. So what that means is, like, if there's 5 people here on the Amber side and there's 6 people on the Sapphire side, you can safely assume that the Sapphire side is probably going to win it. So make sure you always understand the numbers in your fights and have coordinated rotations together, whether it's rotating into a fight or rotating out of a fight. Tempo is all about reducing your downtime. So if you know that a fight is lost and you're going into a lost fight, you are putting yourself in a bad scenario and increasing your downtime. So this is bad tempo. That's a part that a lot of teams don't really seem to understand or kind of like pay attention to, but it's very easy to spiral out of control in this video game, especially with the comeback mechanics plus the earn mechanics. So it's very devastating to have a team wipe. Do not rotate into fights together if you know you're going to lose it. Be the smart person. And the third point that I'm going to be going over is vision/map control. This one is kind of specific to Deadlock, and I'm going to be tying in other games to talk about it. So this game unofficially has like a fog of war or like a fog of war on the map, which is essentially like breaking down the vision cones of your characters. So what I mean by that is if I go to... Okay, so I'm spectating Vindicta, so now I can see what her map is looking at. Everything in this cone is essentially seen, right? It comes up on the minimap and is like exposed or whatever. But there's a lot of other things that have vision cones, and you have to abuse those vision cones. This is sort of like an advanced topic, so it might be a little difficult to explain, but I'll try my best here. Your walkers have vision cones. Your minions have vision cones, or creeps. And you obviously have vision cones. And all 3 of these are really important because it's like a global thing. So what do I mean by this? Globally now, the Yamato just saw this Geist pop up on map, which means everybody just saw this Geist pop up on map because this Geist, the Yamato is nowhere near the Geist. So now, that is a global vision cone, so the Geist just popped up on everybody's minimap. This is really, really important when it comes to tempo because you can use it to your advantage. If you know an opponent's going to be somewhere or you see them pathing to somewhere, you can kind of assume where they're going to be and you can be one step ahead of them. It's good tempo. If you see your opponent going one way, you can force them to go another way, so you can react. That's another good part of tempo. Or you can sort of be a little advanced and like fake people out and abuse these vision cones to let the enemy know where you are if it's part of your plan. So like, where might this be important? For example, it might be important here where like the Viscous just got seen by this Grey Talon, and if this Grey Talon had backed up, he would no longer have vision of Viscous, and he wouldn't know where he is. And he took a teleporter to displace himself heavily. So it's like kind of combining two things, but he combined the vision cone and the teleporter to get really good tempo. What do I mean by good tempo? He got in this fight before the Grey Talon did, if the Grey Talon even chose to get into the fight, right? I'll go to F1 to see like what's happening on the map. But even if that Talon wanted to follow him, he wouldn't have been able to follow him with correct timing because of the way the Viscus played the scenario. He gained time by just going through the teleporter, which like automatically gives you like a 5-second buffer, and also like the pathing that he took. He's a faster character, so he's just gonna have better tempo naturally. So he abused this tempo to get into a fight, do an objective, and now he's going into farm. This little clip kind of exemplifies what good tempo kind of looks like and the difficulties of like balancing it all and making sure that you're juggling all these resources. Those are some of the key points that I wanted to go over in tempo, specifically breaking it down in early game, laning phase, and also the mid game. Thank you everyone for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I'll try my best to get to everyone's questions as quick as I can. Thank you.